Let's get started with this first thing I want to show you. And the first thing I want to show you actually is where does the ADM actually deliver. So the architecture development method. The architecture development method is a part of TOGAF. That means it's the process model. For those of you who are not familiar with TOGAF. And it is about actually architecture change. So I will show you an example of an architecture change later on when we discuss the case. But first of all, of course, we have to talk a little bit, I think, about enterprise architecture in general, because that is of course an important aspect to start with. So when you look at enterprise architecture, basically that is of course a part of a total focus area, and the focus is in this case enterprise. Sometimes when I speak to people, they talk to me about enterprise architecture, and they're only talking about IT, which is great. It's definitely a part of enterprise architecture, but it's not the whole part. The way that TOGAF actually looks at enterprise architecture is basically it's about business and IT. Yeah. So it's a combination of these two. That means IT being information systems and technology. So that means applications, infrastructure, all these aspects, together with IT. Yeah. And these both basically are delivering the right context, I would say, to have basically the change, the architecture change that you make delivered in a proper way. Yeah, so that's about the scope. So that also means that if you start changing something in your organization, and when I draw your organization in red, for instance, if you have an organization like this, and you start changing something on a certain level, that might have impact on both business and IT. Yeah, so that's why I say enterprise architecture, I think, is both. Of course, if you're only doing IT architecture, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But then it's by definition not enterprise architecture, which is a different thing. Because basically every change that you make is starting with somebody responsible for that architecture change, and in this case, it's of course the sponsor. The sponsor who's basically responsible for wanting to solve a problem or wanting to change something in your organization, which has impacts, of course, on multiple parts. Yeah. So that means basically there's a sponsor being responsible, and the sponsor is basically responsible for, of course, the budget, the resourcing, yeah, but also, of course, in the end, the business case. There needs to be a business case to make a change. And that means that that the sponsor actually is kicking off that architecture project. Now you would maybe you wonder now what is the purpose of architecture when you can just start an implementation or a project that does this implementation, and therefore basically you were covered. And basically you're right. Basically you can start an implementation project, to do to make that architecture change. Yeah, so that means that you do an implementation. And the implementation will basically take care that that part that you want, that the sponsor wants, is getting done, and that's basically no problem. So that means when you do that, then you immediately jump from let's say the sponsor to an implementation, which is fine. But then you have a clear scope on basically on the implementation side, and that's only a scope which is project oriented. Yeah, so that means this sponsor has a project scope, which is fine because that's exactly the purpose that he has or she has in mind. Yeah. However, that does not give the possibility to put, for instance, a part of strategy in place. Yeah? So if you have a strategic plan, and just one of these aspects that you are doing is this project, then the whole strategic scope taken in account, because basically you jump immediately to the implementation side. So that means strategic, I mean actually short, midterm and long-term goals that you want to achieve. So that's basically what the goal is. So that whole purpose actually of that strategic part is very much connected with enterprise architecture, to make sure that your short-term decisions, for instance a project implementation, are in line with midterm and long-term initiatives that you have as a company in mind. So basically that's where the TOGAF actually framework kicks in. So basically we could say that TOGAF actually fits in this place, and this is actually the place where we do architecture work. So this is where we do architecture, and for example you can use TOGAF. There's multiple approaches, but you can use for instance TOGAF as a method, and I will explain to you later why I draw you these circles. You can use TOGAF as a method to do that architecture development phase. I often call this architecture development feasibility. Yeah. Because basically what you have is you have a goal in mind. The sponsor has a goal in mind, better said. And by using that goal actually, you want to make sure that what you're selecting in the implementation is feasible. That you are a feasible approach to execute. Once you have that feasibility checked, you can do the implementation and you can basically start implementing. And as we know, implementation is basically nothing new, because we do that every day, because we have existing project management organizations inside using other frameworks like Prince 2 or like PMP. So all different, let's say, frameworks that are used already for architecture, for implementation of an architecture. So there's nothing we need to do that there. But they are very concerned about the implementation aspects, not about the architecture aspects. So that's why we have different frameworks there. And then basically there's a last stage, of course, where we actually have in the end the operations side. So there's also, of course, operate. That means once we made that architecture change, it needs to be there, it needs to be operated, it needs to be managed. Whether we're talking about changing a business process or changing an IT component, it is all the same story. You need to operate it in the end. So that's basically what's happening there, and that's basically the third step that we take. So what I want to show you actually, and inside this, there's also a framework, for instance, ITIL, from IT operations aspect. ITIL is, for instance, an existing framework. Maybe you run other frameworks inside your company. That's possible. But just to show you that you have architecture development, feasibility, implementation, and operate. So these are basically the stages, and what we're focusing on here today is basically the architecture side. So that means my scope for today to discuss with you is actually what can you do here in this area with TOGAF. Yeah. So that's basically the focus we do have, because whatever happens in this architecture change or in this project mindset of the sponsor, there is impact on organization. There's impact on most likely business. Yeah. And I will discuss later on what that actually involves, but most likely also IT. Maybe it's both. So that's what we do here. And it also means that we have different stakeholders that we need to manage. Yeah. So there will be stakeholders influenced by that architecture change. So that's basically what I want to discuss with you today. And from TOGAF actually I picked the process model called the ADM, so the Architecture Development Model. Method, sorry. It's a method actually for architecture development, and that's what I want to take today as an example for that. And the other aspect that you see here in the whole, let's say, in the TOGAF approach that we look at is the governance. And the governance part of TOGAF is actually focused on this whole area as well. So that is actually governance. So architecture governance I'm talking about. I'm not talking about operations governance, but more in the fact that if we implement an architecture or if we make an architecture change, we need to make sure that it's properly implemented, but that it's also properly operated. Those are important aspects, of course, to take in mind. And TOGAF offers you the facility to do that. So that's basically the focus today. And for that, actually, I came up with a case example that I will discuss with you today. So that's what I would like to move on. I don't know if there's any questions on your part that I have to address now. So I assume that you have a little bit of understanding of the enterprise architecture environment and some experience on let's say the connection between project management itself and so implementation and architecture. So we go from here. So for that, I would like to start with a new blank sheet then. Because basically I'm talking about a case, and that means the case has a clear sponsor. In this case, I would like to discuss with you the case of a service-oriented organization or a customer support organization, actually. So that means I again have a sponsor in this case. Yeah. And in this case, the sponsor is the head of or manager of customer services. Yeah, so that's and today actually there's an organization in place that we have set up. And this organization has already an existing customer service, and the customer service actually is of course serving customers. So that's actually an sorry for that. And the customer actually is the one that can actually, of course, get some customer service. Either, and they basically have two facilities at the moment. So basically, they have a phone facility, so you can call this company, or you can send them a mail. So that's basically what it contains. So these are the two what we call channels. That the customer can use to address a complaint or to do an inquiry on specific information. So that's basically what we're doing. The sponsor actually has come up with a couple of so he's done a couple of analysis in this area, and actually the analysis show that there's actually bad response times. Customers are sent from one desk to another desk, so that means long wait times. Yeah. And it means actually that that the customer satisfaction, because that's in the end the whole goal, of course, has to be increased. Yeah? So that actually it's too low. It's low. And he wants to increase that because in the end, of course, that's connected to revenue, and therefore they come up with certain critical success factors, of course, to measure against these customer satisfaction levels, and a way to increase that. And basically, the conclusion that was done after this analysis is that they want to implement something which they call self-help or self-service. So that means instead of letting the customer dial in and get, of course, the information to them, Basically, we want to give them an enablement to a capability to let them self get in and get, of course, access to that specific information. So that of course that could be addressed, and that way they could actually help themselves before actually getting into more contact. So that will have a couple of positive things. First of all, the customer has the ability to get into touch with specific information about certain problems, or to register a complaint. And the second thing, of course, is that it will offload the internal customer service department, and therefore they can be busy with solving problems instead of taking complaints and registering them. So that's a clear case. It's very business oriented, as you can see. This has nothing primarily to do with an IT demand, but of course it will have impact on IT. So that's what I want to show you. I want to show you that by diving into the ADM, the architecture development method, and show you what the process will actually show, and how the process can be used. So let's move into that. For those of you who've never seen the ADM, this is the ADM. So the ADM, and I will not talk about all, let's say, all specific circles. The circles actually represent specific actions that we can address, and that of course will help to get specific things sorted out. So the preliminary I leave behind, but I will focus on the first one, which is phase A. And phase A actually is the one that gets the architecture started with the sponsor. And therefore, in phase A, actually you do a couple of things. One of the things you do is you identify, for instance, stakeholders. So the whole ADM, actually, the whole architecture development method in TOGAF is very much focused on stakeholder involvement. A very important aspect, of course, because the stakeholders in the end basically decide on the acceptability of the solution that you come up with. So that's one of the important things you need to do, is to identify the stakeholders. Another thing, of course, you need to clearly state is, of course, the critical success factors, and plus business case if there's one defined, to make sure that whatever we do during architecture development, we always can reflect back to the need, to the clear need and the purpose that we run the architecture change for. And whatever we implement in the end also has to, of course, come up with these. So that's a clear one. So, for instance, for the case that we are talking about, we need to first identify, of course, who's involved and what is the case. So, for that, of course, we need to first think about what the impact is on the architecture, on the architecture side. So that's why we move into what is called B, C, and D. So that means we have different architecture development cycles. That's business architecture, information systems, and technology. So that's a split actually that is made not only by TOGAF actually, but as you can see, it completes the whole enterprise architecture. So the complete definition of enterprise architecture. But this split actually is also seen in many other frameworks, so therefore it's not specific but more generic, I would say. So that means in business architecture context, we mostly focus on the business side. So that means here we're looking at processes. We are looking at skills and roles. We're also looking at the business functions and the business services. So, for instance, the customer support service is a clearly defined service, and it has probably some sub-functions inside. So now let's jump into that and look a little bit what it means for the case we just described. So for that, actually, I taken a new blank sheet, and then I use that as a foundation to discuss the business side a little bit more. So what we actually do is what we call this actually the baseline architecture. So that means this is actually the architecture that we initially already have. So the one that we have already in our organization. There's many ways to describe this actually. So that means there's not a unique way to describe a business architecture. Things that you can use to describe is really storytelling, or you can use Archimate to model it. And so Archimate is definitely a nice language to model an existing architecture, and also the changes that you would like to do. The nice thing about Archimate is that you can do it on business level, on application and infrastructure level. Yeah, but for now, actually, I would just like to use a very simple drawing just to explain what we are doing. So back to the people we were talking about. We were talking about a customer, because I'm now focusing only on the business side. So that means I'm talking about business architecture as such. There's a customer, and the customer accesses either by, like we said, by phone. My drawing is actually pretty bad, so that's why I need to do some assisting wording as a consequence. So that means we access a business service called customer support. And inside that customer support, actually, there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, what we do is, for instance, we register. We register, for instance, the customer. Maybe he's already registered, but maybe you have to do that again. Yeah, so that could be a thing. That's one process step we need to do. So now I'm diving actually from a service here into, let's say, what is behind. So what is the process behind? And again, this is a very simple example. There might be multiple things happening behind the scenes, of course. So you register the customer, then you take the complaint, for instance. Sorry. Take the complaint. Then maybe you access an FAQ, so frequently asked questions function inside your organization to find solutions. And if not, you basically escalate it to what is called second line support. And maybe there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. And from there on, actually, there's a different group called second line support. We take up the call and basically start investigating the cause. So that means these are stakeholders involved there. So these are people, and these are also people. So this is a department. People that participate in this simple process. So that means actually what I'm drawing here actually is a very simple service, a very simple part of the process and part of maybe process steps that we have, and this is business architecture explained in a very simple, simplistic, functional way. Yeah. If we're talking about functional ways, so maybe of course I have to put more requirements in there, because basically this customer support is available 24/7. So that's of course a requirement. Maybe this customer support is available in 2 languages. It could all be that there's more information that we need to address, of course, in order to make this picture complete. Maybe there's also response times. So response times to the service that we are delivering. It could all, of course, make the requirements look let's say, more complete. So basically, in this phase, in this baseline architecture, you specify the functional need, the functional need that is there today, or that is today maybe already in place. And basically, what is done inside TOGAF, and the way that it's called in TOGAF is called it's called architecture building blocks. So that's called A, B, B. So architecture building blocks are basically describing. Let me do that again. Describing the functionality that is required, that is needed. And this is actually what is there in place today. Yeah, so that's that part. So that makes us actually now move from when we go back to what we had before. So when we were looking at the ADM, basically we are collecting now in phase B the architecture requirements for this case, and we are defining that as services, process, whatever is in place today in your organization. Now basically we move to phase C, and in phase C, as you can see, that's a rhyme. Basically we move now to what is called the current information systems architecture. So then we make a baseline for that. And in information systems, actually, we focus much more on applications. So apps. We focus on data objects, data that you would like to use or is being used. But also application, not only the application, let's say components, but also we focus on functions. Functions and services. So that means when you're using, for instance, a service bus concept, enterprise service bus, then this is the place where you address, of course, the services and the required needs to integrate, for instance. Yeah, so that's C. So when we move back now to the previous design that we made. Excuse me, because I have to switch now from one to the other. So that means we move into business architecture. In business architecture, I make it blue. So maybe this this whole customer support service is using, for instance, a customer relationship application, a CRM application. Sorry for that. Yeah, so that CRM application actually is then being used. So let's make it CRM app. So customer relationship management application is being used, and one of the functions that we use inside that application, again, it's an ABB, an architecture building block, so I don't describe actually what it is at the moment. We will come back to that later. Yeah, inside, for instance, you do customer registration, which is a specific specific function inside. So customer registration is, for instance, a part of that application. Another part could be that that you have an FAQ, so all the registered all the registered complaints from before are maybe also stored in there. And maybe there's also a customer resolution. Resolution as an engine, as a function inside. And maybe there's also something about service level reporting. Yeah? We don't see it being used here, but maybe there is. So reporting. So all these specific aspects actually show that this application is actually delivering some functionalities to that business architecture. Yeah? And of course we can start drawing the connection lines if there's a need for that, to show actually the involvement. And as you can see now you also might understand that if we start making changes to specific components or to specific, let's say, business services, that it has an immediate impact on the application side. So on the let's say the information system side. So it's called information systems, but actually it's not really about hardware or whatever. It's purely about application. And maybe also data objects. So we didn't discuss that yet, but maybe there's of course data stored on this specific application about CRM information. The way actually this application integrates is not clear at the moment, so we didn't specify that. Maybe we have to do that in the future. I don't know. It's depending on the type of architecture change that we're going to make. So at the moment, this is just a representation as I have it, and maybe there's more functionality specification needed when we go along. So that's basically the architecture side on the information systems landscape. So now we have business information systems. So that means there's one left that we need to come up with, and then I go back to my TOGAF representation, and that is basically the one that we have as last part of the architecture development steps, so BCD, which is the technology aspect. Technology is really comparable to infrastructure. So infrastructure, and that's basically about, of course, it's about servers. I mean, hardware. It's about networking. It's also about deployable software. So that means more packages so that you can deploy. All these aspects are in here. So that's the technology part. So now let's move back to our previous picture, and that's not the proper one. And let's complete that. So basically we're now into infrastructure, so into technology. So let me make that green. And that means that when we move into this part, basically we want to show how the CRM application, for instance, is being hosted. So we have the CRM application, for instance. And we know that the CRM application is actually made highly available, so that's why it's on a cluster. It's connected over a network, which we call the LAN. And actually, this cluster is is basically facilitated by two systems on different places running on Unix. So I call it Unix hosting. Unix hosting, and that's basically what I show here, and that's basically at the moment all I need to get into this level of discussion. Again, these are all architecture building blocks, so because they don't show you any, let's say, specific solutions. They don't show you any vendor or product that we are using. Yeah, so this is technology. Technology architecture, and basically that is the way today that we have this connection between technology and business. Very high level, as you can see, very much into a functional way of how things are connected to each other. So that's basically it. Now, of course, when we are done with that that part, we like to move, of course, into a more specific part on the target architecture. So that's basically what happens in the ADM as well. Because previously, of course, we were still working on the baseline, and now we start working, of course, on the target. So what is the situation we will go to? So now you can use actually the same way of going through all these different architectures to start a completely new architecture mindset. So let's quickly do that, just to show what happens then. And during, of course, these phases, that's what I will show in the next part of the discussion, is that of course that will bring of course new stakeholders and new people that are part of the target impact in focus. So when we start with again with the baseline, or sorry, with the target for the business side. So now we move into target architecture. We move again into businesses, so that's the same. So we said we have an initially, of course, we have an still the customer, of course. But the fact is that nowadays, of course, we want to let them self-service themselves. So that means we need to build something new, and that something new we call it a portal. So, for instance, a web portal for self-help, for instance, for self-service. Yeah, so that means that's now the access facility for the customer. And behind the scenes, of course, we are still doing different processes, right? We're still doing the registration of the customer. Yeah, so that's still a part. We give the customer, of course, access to that FAQ, so that he can actually, or she can actually access, of course, already existing cases and knowledge on specific products or services. And in the end, maybe we still have this our second line available. So that these are people internal to our company that still maybe do this second line support. So if customers cannot solve it themselves, then basically we take it over, and basically we give them then access to that support. I don't know exactly which order that needs to be developed, of course, but this is actually the new business architecture that we have in place. So when we start doing that, you can see that there is of course an impact for maybe for the second line people. Maybe you find out that when you want to do such a thing, when you want to implement a web portal, you need to talk to stakeholders who were previously involved in this area, in the customer registration, to find out exactly what they register from a customer, what is handy to do, and what can be automated and what cannot be automated. Maybe you start developing a new access to that FAQ, and you need to investigate. Okay, what is the current situation of the FAQ? What is the quality of that work? Can we use the same information that we use today now internally? That type of question. So subject matter experts, for instance, will be highly involved in that development of that piece of architecture. Of course, you will also need to have people involved into this web functionality. So you're going to develop a web functionality in the end, which enables that self-service part. Yeah. So this is all basically the business architecture side, and you need to come up, of course, with clear specifications on that to develop that further. Yeah, so that also means that you need clear definitions, for instance, on for instance service level management, quality, and how you can access that information. So when it's about accessing information, basically that moves us into the next part, which is then the information systems architecture. So that's basically the next one. systems architecture part. And yeah, now you see that a lot of things have changed, are going to change here, because previously, of course, we had the CRM application that was accessing that was used, sorry, by the people from the first line, but the first line is now totally not in the case anymore. So that means we need something new. We need something new, which may be called a type of web portal. And the web portal needs to support maybe a couple of sub functions like registering a client, registering a customer. And maybe you want to connect that to some authentication and authorization mechanism. And from there, basically, you might have to connect it to an existing the existing CRM, because you want to check, of course, if the customer is connected to that already existing in the CRM. We know that the FAQ was also a piece of that CRM. So if that was the case, then how are we going to access that over the web portal? And these are all questions that you need to address now. You need to show how these interfaces will actually take place. And if you do that, of course, you need to, in the end, and you still have the resolution functionality and the reporting functionality, which are still there, because your second line is still using that part. So how do you make sure that it's all a consistent single piece of architecture? So that's basically what you develop there. And of course here you have the same thing. You have the same new people coming, stakeholders coming in, who are responsible maybe for the CRM application. Maybe new people that want to have to develop this web portal part. But also people from the business side, of course, who are maybe responsible for the creation of the forms and the way that complaints are registered, categories that you would like to use, all focusing on systems, information systems, and the way that you integrate. So if you're using service-oriented architecture, then most likely these interfacing will take place by using service bus calls. And then the question, of course, is, where is my data? Is it stored there? Is it stored there? These type of discussions will take place in the information systems architecture part. Then when we move along, because we're now basically into information systems parts of the development. The last but not least part, of course, is we move into the infrastructure part. That's on this side, so the technology architecture. And in technology, we more look at, we already had the existing CRM application that was hosted by the clustering solution from on the Unix part. So the cluster CRM. Now we have to, of course, dive into how this web portal is being hosted. So maybe the web portal is running on some WebSphere system from IBM. WebSphere. Maybe there's it's hosted by another a totally different hosting application using a Unix single systems. So it shows actually how this is constructed. It also shows how these CRM application and web service applications are communicating to each other. One is still using, of course, the LAN as we know it. But the web portal, of course, is using the internet in the end. So it's using the WAN connectivity or internet. So that means we will show in this in this technology architecture how this target architecture will look like when we start implementing that new approach. And that basically shows you and involves the stakeholders responsible for that part in this area. So that's basically all architecture work as we've seen it now, all based on what is called architecture building blocks. So still on this side we're doing ABBs. Yeah, so that's still all ABVs in this case. So that means it's a description of pieces of functionality. So of course I'm only drawing boxes here, but in the end you need to describe, of course, what's really happening inside an registration customer part of the application, because you need that, because in the end you need to implement that, of course, in the application itself. But it's all functionality. Now actually I want to take you to the next step, or the next phase, as it's called in TOGAF, which is called, let me quickly go back to my ADM, which is called opportunities and solutions. And that means actually here we will start looking at now what solutions we can use to cover this architecture part. So what basically happens now is that for every architecture building block that we identify, we have to come up with a solution development. Yeah, so the way that actually works is that of course you investigate. Let's go back to that target architecture. Sorry, that's the wrong one. I'm a bit lost in my screens here. So for every architecture building block that you identified, of course, there need to maybe more one or more solution building blocks in place to cover that functionality. So, for instance, when you look at the business side, here you start, of course, identifying the clear definitions to be delivered. For instance, on the registration part. For instance, the part where you have to come up with service definitions, and how fast are we able to still solve that customer need. But for instance, in the complaint, for instance, maybe you want to assign different categories, right? If you want to assign different categories, then you need to specify that, of course, during that registration of the complaint. So these are all let's say detailed things we need to come up with a detailed solution. When we move into solutions here, we start looking for for instance, for a web portal, and I mean really a web portal that we can use for that service. So, for instance, you come up with a product from I don't know what is there today that you can use for this specific need, but you couldn't come up with maybe from an so HP service center, right? Yeah, center. And then you find out that you need to do some custom development. So, for instance, this registration of the customer, maybe you need to address a specific form, and you need to come up with a usability design. So you need to come up with a detailed form, how the form will look like, what type of entry fields that are needed, but also the workflow that will be followed, and it's the one that we defined, of course, initially in the business architecture, but it has to be followed in the application side. But also, for instance, what information do we collect from our customers? What entry fields do we enable them to search on? Do we use free text search? What if we escalate to a second line? How will that work? So all the different workflows will be, of course, also in the solution addressed. So that's basically what you need to do on this side. And how will it, for instance, integrate on these specific things? What is the way to integrate? Is it API? Is it service bus? Is it a different mechanism? And the same is true, of course, for the technology part, where we start looking for clear building blocks. So, for instance, I said there's a cluster here with two Unix systems. Here we have to be more clear and more specific. So, if it's a CRM, is it an SAP application or is it something else? So, SAP CRM, for instance, and this one was, like we said, it was the HP solution running on top of WebSphere from IBM, for instance. And if it's Linux, is it 4.6 Red Hat, or is it another version? So when you dive into solutions, you make it more concrete and more concrete towards a way to implement it. And that actually brings us to and to the next phase in the ADM from TOGAF, which is actually the implementation and migration planning. So that's F in this case, because here actually the ideas in ENF actually already is that you start working on a plan on how to implement this solution. Yeah, so that's an important aspect, of course, in the end, like we said in the beginning. TOGAF is a kind of preparation for your implementation, so it's feasibility as such. And here, basically, you start on working on the implementation and migration plan. So implementation and migration. Sorry. So that means there you start working on a plan, and that plan actually involves a couple of things. And one of the things is that it actually, since you identified now all the solution building blocks, the SBBs, as they are called in TOGAF, that plan actually makes it possible to make a detailed plan for the implementation project. Yeah? To start doing things in a certain way to build. And when you start building, of course, the first thing you will start with is not business architecture, but it's in most cases, of course, the technology architecture. And so that means all the architecture building blocks, the SBBs that you need to put in place to cover the ABBs, the solution building blocks. So these are all the products, right? These are the Linux systems, for instance, or the CRM application if it was all, that you need to adjust, or the HP solution that you need to put in place. And these are, of course, in a specific order. Once you've done that, of course, you can start doing the application work. So you have to maybe develop the application for the portal. You need to develop maybe some other specific customizations. Anyway, again, all the SBBs that are needed to address the architecture that we developed for the information systems, to put in place. And once we have done that, of course, the last thing to do is, of course, to combine that with the building blocks for the business architecture. So that's the orange one. So that means actually all the last customizations we need to do there. For instance, maybe some adjustments on the second line, because now there's no first line anymore, need to be put in place. Some adjustments that we need to put in place for reporting. Basically, and these different things we put in the implementation migration plan are work packages. And that means actually from these we can directly build, and then the implementation migration plan is completed. The nice thing about that is that that's already then to such a level that the implementation team, the project leader, actually can use that in the project. And so now the project can actually take that plan and start working on that. The last thing you do actually in F, and that's where the feasibility is then complete, is basically you do a final check, of course, on risks and also on the business case and the critical success factors to see what we develop now in the architecture here in BCD, is that in line with what we what the sponsor gave us as a clear need. Yeah? And if that's clear, then the implementation can basically start, and that's what's happening in G actually, where it's not happening in G because, of course, it's not about architecture anymore, but it's about implementation. Yeah, so basically that brings us back then to the early picture that I showed you, where all the different stadia took place. And basically you see here that where there is a different, let's say, different step between ADMS, so between architecture and moves into PMO, project management. So that's basically where the architecture is then being implemented, and that's basically is where the the TOGAF work primarily ends, except for the governance, which is a different thing to discuss. But that is actually where our case stops.